around the time of Reagan in the 80s, there was this kind of, well, I mean, there's a Reagan Revolution, but associated with it was that they kind of redid the FTC from the kind of enforcement. I guess it even predated him into early or late Carter administration, but that certainly it crystallized under Reagan in changing both how the FTC functioned and introducing red tape over how it worked. And you had to do some work to get rid of that would shortened what kind of rules you could get established in terms of timeline. But can you help me understand why was what Reagan did so durable? You had Clinton, who had 8 years. You had the second Bush, who had 8 years. And they don't seem to have the same kind of effect. Specifically about Reagan, how was what he introduced through the FTC so lasting and impactful?
It's such an important question, and one I've thought a lot about. I would say the Reagan administration's durability extended beyond the FTC, right? They basically came to office with a pretty radical set of economic ideas, a pretty radical set of ideas about the government, in terms of really moving away from the New Deal, really introducing this idea that the best thing for the government to do is to get out of the way because markets are most likely to self-correct. There was a view that increasing consolidation and monopolization would actually create more efficiencies that would benefit people. Whereas if the monopolies abuse their power, they would be quickly disciplined by the free market. So just a set of ideas that candidly had been developed over many decades. I mean, some of the key thinkers that ended up playing leading roles in the Reagan administration had been writing about this stuff since the 40s and 50s, at which time it was viewed as kind of fringe, but then they were backed by a lot of investment. They had several decades to socialize this more. And then when they came into government, they had a real governing plan. They had a real plan for what are the key agencies, what are the ways that we want to reshape them. And I think, they had 12 years, 8 years of Reagan, 4 years of Bush. And by the time Clinton comes around, a lot of what the Reagan people had introduced, which initially was viewed as very radical, was now just the new common wisdom. And you're right, it wasn't something that we saw a huge pendulum shift away from, even in the next Democratic administrations. So I think part of it, they had foresight. They had a real clarity of vision about what they were trying to achieve. They had a deep bench of people. They had everybody from the federal judges who they knew they wanted to appoint because they were going to pursue and further these ideologies in the courts through the laws that through the legal opinions they would be writing. They had key leaders to go who'd be running agencies. They had, people they wanted to run for Congress. And so they really had a multi-pronged, multi-frontal plan for how to do this. And I think, since then, we just haven't seen as, I think, much clarity of focus in terms of what is the alternative. I think in the Biden administration, we saw a version of that. I think there was an opportunity to do more to make sure it was, more fully being implemented across all agencies, not just one subset of them. But it's the Reagan administration, has a lot of lessons for us to glean. I would also say about this administration, you can disagree vehemently with what they're doing, but they spent their time out of government very productively. They figured out what were the levers of government, the mechanisms of their authorities that they wanted to use once they were back. And we see them doing that very boldly.
I was going to say, this sounds what Reagan did, eerily reminiscent of some kind of Project 2025 precursor, no?
Yeah, there are some analogs there in terms of the extent of planning that was done. And again, the planning that needs to be done, not just at the level of, oh, these are policies that I'd like to enact, but what is the exact legal authority that already exists that I know on day one I can use to do X? You also really do need a deep bench of people who are both very mission aligned, but also have the right types of experiences navigating these agencies and know how to go through the bureaucracy. And so that combination of deep mission alignment, the deep substantive expertise, and then skill at navigating a bureaucracy, they have that deep bench. And, that's another place where the other side has more work to do.
Kid Rock is very upset at Ticketmaster, which sounds something like a setup to a punchline, but actually is probably not, given his relationship to the president. FTC is, I believe, suing Ticketmaster. Are my ticket prices for concert and sports games going to be cheaper as a result of this?
We'll have to see. I mean, one of the rules that the FTC was able to finalize during my tenure was a rule that said Ticketmaster companies like Ticketmaster can't lie to you about the ticket price. So there had been this long-time practice where they would show you, the ticket costs $50, but then by the time you go to check out, it's actually $80 because they're $30 and all these different types of service fees and convenience fees and email fees. And we said you have to actually be upfront about what the final price is. And we've heard that that has already kind of reduced some of these bait and switch tactics. The Justice Department actually also during the last administration brought a big antitrust lawsuit against Ticketmaster, noting that the Ticketmaster Live Nation merger had been a key inflection point in terms of just how much they've been able to bully artists, bully concert venues, and really remove competition in ways that probably results in everybody paying more. So those two initiatives, I think will hopefully be successful in bringing down prices. Some of the recent FTC actions were about some of these, bots that are buying up masses of tickets and what they're doing. So we'll have to see what happens there too.
We have just a few minutes left, but if I may, quick question on what Meta is trying. So there is renewed emphasis by this FTC, which is different than the one you ran, certainly, but there is still some things to salvage, namely their concern about AI chatbots, social media, and how these tech companies are kind of enforcing it, particularly on vulnerable populations. Meta announced a new AI parental controls, for example, following this FTC inquiry. Obviously, they're trying to head this off at the pass. To what extent will they be successful, do you think? I mean, if past is prologue, how much are these kinds of get ahead of it interventions ultimately successful?
I don't know. I mean, we've seen with that company in particular, there has been a deep, deep, deep culture of turning a blind eye and being pretty reckless when it comes to rolling out products that can do enormous harm to people. There has been a lot of reporting at the Wall Street Journal these last few months about how people inside Meta were actually raising alarms, raising flags about how some of these chatbot tools could be predatory, could really be abusing kids, subjecting them to all sorts of horrible, exposure and treatments. And Mark Zuckerberg and high level executives explicitly turned a blind eye because they are just caught up in this AI arms race and they don't care to implement any safeguards that they think will give them any type of disadvantage in the marketplace. So I worry that when you have that type of culture all the way at the very top, these types of initiatives sometimes can be more like window dressing or kind of band-aids or kind of, PR rather than a real commitment to solve the underlying problem. But, if I'm proven wrong, I will be thrilled. But unfortunately, this company in particular just has a long, long history of allowing all sorts of predatory conduct on the platform.
And to that end, also anti-competitive conduct, right? They're buying. I mean, we talked about AWS going down. When Meta has issues, I can't talk to my relatives overseas on WhatsApp. I can't get on IG to look at photos. There's just a suite of products that go down by virtue of them in collecting it. And of course, it was because, as I understand it, they were competitive on desktop, not mobile. So they just collected everything all in one go and said, "Oh, now we purchased capacity that we otherwise would have been outcompeted around." So they've got actually a number of fronts on this that they've engaged in rather questionable practices, right?
Yeah, I mean, having been a law enforcer that, investigated their practices, I'd be comfortable saying they have been a serial lawbreaker and a recidivist when it comes to, being unable to follow the law.